Responding Wisely, which is the ninth in a sort of series of foundation stones or milestones, if you like, that we're putting in place that together make up like the foundation stones of a cathedral for living well. So just to ask you to just bring to mind a couple of kind of maybe scenarios that might just pass as moments through your day. And just see what happens when I mention these. A momentary sadness, or conversely, a feeling of love. A notification on your phone of a message from a friend that you haven't heard from for a long time. Some breaking news of some news story somewhere in the world that's important to you, that you care about. Fragments of moments from your day. What comes up when you bring those to mind? So in this kind of journey so far of examining a life well lived, the kind of key foundation stones for this theme, responding wisely, have been the coming to see the mind and the body more clearly, seeing the momentary passing of body states and mind states, and the ability in any moment to anchor and gather the scattered mind. And that, of course, brings this sense of a shift in perspective. We're seeing these moments not as we're experiencing them, we're seeing them from a different perspective. We're shining light, if you like, on what's happening in any moment. And by shining the light and creating something of a space, something of a shift of perspective, we're creating the possibility of responding wisely. What does that mean? Instead of reacting, just allowing habit and just the kind of flow of water, if you like, to pass through, we're maybe introducing the possibility of asking the question, what is this? What, if anything, is needed in this moment? And there's a phrase that's very often used, that it's one of those phrases that you can come back to it again and again, and I think it captures this really, really well. It's kind of a phrase that I think can be an exploration for a lifetime. Between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies a potential for growth and for freedom, that momentary sadness, that sense of love, that notification reading of a message from a friend we've not heard from for a while, that news story that draws us in. Between those stimuli and how we respond, there is potentially that space. So what I want to do now is I want to give voice to somebody else, but just before I do that, I want to just use these two words, pausing and possibility. That if we are able to pause and create that space, we are creating a sense of possibility. The philosopher Kierkegaard spoke about riches and fame and pleasure, all being really alluring things. But he has this sort of phrase in one of his writings about the sense of possibility being a much bigger prize, a much more kind of valuable prize. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give voice to a character in my book, Mindfulness for Life, who is a woman in her 60s. Sophia, she's called. She's a grandmother. She's actually also a mindfulness teacher. But in the context of the clip you're about to hear, she's a grandmother and the grandmother to a little toddler called Noah. and a dog called Rufus. And she has a long-standing mindfulness practice. And she talks about this space between stimulus and reactivity and response. And she invokes something that she's learned and that we've covered in previous webinars, this idea of the two arrows. The first arrow is the momentary sadness, it's the phone pinging, it's the breaking news on our phone. The second arrow is the layers potentially that we place on top of that. So all of that's just by way of a little bit of context on Sophia and what she is about to say. So let me just share the screen for a second. And here she is.
I was in my living room this week with my grandson Noah and Rufus, my dog. Noah was playing with his trucks and Rufus was asleep in his bed. I had put the mug on the arm of the chair where I was sitting because my tremors were quite bad, but it crashed to the floor. The tea spilled and the mug's handle broke. Rufus looked up from his bed, came over to see what had happened, sniffed the liquid to see if it was worth drinking, decided no, and then went back to his bed. Noah looked on with delight at the whole scene, the noise, the cup breaking, the spill, my reaction, and Rufus's reaction. He came over as well to explore the situation in much the same way, although he used his hands to explore the liquid, mug, and broken handle. It was interesting. Neither Rufus nor Noah reacted the way I instinctively had, berating myself, "You stupid idiot." I'm not sure I'll ever fully shake off my inner critic. As the mug fell and smashed into pieces, it was as though time slowed down and I felt the shame and horror wash through me like a tsunami. Not just my mind, but my body too. But this time I got interested in how Rufus and Noah reacted. Noah's parents, my daughter and son-in-law, are balanced and caring. Noah hasn't internalized the same self-critic I have. He was just curious, even joyful about this interesting experience. All three of us in this little scene, Noah, Rufus, and I, had an initial experience as our attention was drawn to the spill and broken mug. As I've learned, that was the first arrow. My mind was ready to fire a volley of second arrows stemming from the wave of shame that I had learned growing up. I should behave perfectly. Making mistakes means I'm stupid. Even though an arrow or two were fired, I chose to get down on the ground with Noah. It was a wood floor, so no harm had been done. I want Noah to have good memories of me. And more than that, I want him to be happy without being crippled by the inner critic that has been part of me for so long. Moments like this suggest he will have this gift, which gives me great joy. I mostly did okay with my son, but Noah seems so together, so happy. That gives me great joy.
Knowing how our frame of mind, so much there, isn't there? There's so much there. Sophia is describing this moment, and maybe just take a moment to think for yourself. If you drop a mug of hot liquid and it shatters all over the floor, what happens for you? What's your immediate reaction? The stimulus is the mug falling. The reaction is the second arrow. Sophia, through her practice, was able to shift perspective. She was able to be curious. She was able to be playful. She was able to actually even get outside of her own experience and think about the legacy of her grandson, Noah, who she took care of several days a week. This is what I mean by between stimulus and reaction, there is a space. Yes, the reactivity, the second arrows came in really quickly, but Sophia, through her practice, had started to create a little bit of space. And in that quote again, there in that space is the power to choose our response. And in our response lies that potential for growth and for freedom. It's a lifelong, and such a profound lesson. So I want to just expand a little bit on this sense of possibility, because it isn't abstract, it's very real. That sense of when we're standing with that sense of pausing and possibility, one of the things we're doing is we're drawing on all the foundation stones we've put in place. And what I'd like to introduce is this idea of doorways, that in that pause moment, in that space that we've created, there are, if we look around us, a series of different doors. And we can choose to push against any one of those doors, whichever one feels like the wise one to go through. So there are 5 doors. The first is our body. So remember, we've talked a lot about the body, and the body is a place that we can bring our awareness to. And when we do that, there are so many different things that can happen with the body. We can simply come back to it as an anchor. So in Sophia's case, just anchoring is a way of stopping the second arrows from being fired off. The body can also be a place where we can read out what's happening. What's happening in the chest, what's happening in the face, what's happening to the heartbeat, what's happening to the breathing. Again, with Sophia, with that inner critic, there'll be a sense of contraction, a sense of shame, a sense of self-depreciation. The body can be a guide. What's needed? What does my body need right now? It needs to shift out, in Sophia's case, from this frozen state and come down onto the ground next to Noah and see the world from his perspective. And for many people with an established practice, the body can be a sanctuary. It can be a place to come home to, reside in, as a sense of sanctuary. So that's the first door, our body door. We've always got that choice to turn inwards to a sense of the body door. A second door is mindfulness practice itself. And at this point in this series of milestones and foundation stones, there are so many different practices that we've learned, right? We've learned practices about anchoring, stabilizing, gathering the scattered mind, cultivating a sense of kindness, befriending ourselves. Each of these practices is potentially available to us in a moment. So as we pause and we stop, one of the doors open to us is, what do I need right now? Do I need to anchor? Do I need to gather my mind? Do I need to develop a sense of equanimity or kindness? These can be little mini practices, or they can be more extensive practices, like doing some mindful stretching or some yoga. The third doorway I'll call the thoughts doorway. In any moment, the mind is inevitably creating stories, thinking, having lots of imagery going on. The beauty of the pause in this sense is that we are now looking at these thoughts from a different perspective. There's the sadness, which for me can quite quickly, like a sort of a little storm system, turn into something more. Or the breaking news story about something that we feel really passionate about, whatever that might be, whatever kind of thing that's around in the world that we really care about, can feel like a vortex that sucks us down. There's that. This is the thought storm. I think one of the things I hope I've really emphasized is that with this idea of mindfulness for life, one of the big kind of movements that I'm suggesting is that mindfulness has 4 keys to it, 4 foundational pieces to it, if you like. And the 4th piece, which is often underemphasized, is action, doing something, behavior, skillful action. So the doorway here is the doorway of wise action. What in this moment feels like an action or a doing nothing that feels like it is skillful, wise, enlarging. And then the final doorway is a sort of re-entry doorway. What I mean by that is just having taken a pause, created a bit of space, we go back into the situation we were in before. But of course, we're not going back into the situation we were in before because we've changed. We've stepped back and we have created a sense of being rather than doing, responding rather than reacting, perspective rather than a sort of narrow tunnel sense of rote and reactivity. So these are, if we can pause, the doorways that we potentially have that we can push against, whichever feels useful. The body door, the mindfulness practice door, the thoughts door, the wise action door, and the re-entry going back to what we've stepped back from door. So maybe just take a moment to think about something that's happened earlier today, or maybe in the last couple of days, where you felt compelled with reactivity. And as you think back to it, you think, gosh, if I'd been able to just pause and step back and had a sense of these different doorways available to me, what might a wise response have looked like? And this is not in any kind of self-judgment kind of way. It's in a kind of curious and playful way. What might I discover when I do this? I did a podcast the other day for a colleague who I respect enormously, and he asked a question at the end that I wasn't expecting, which was, what would I tell my 16-year-old self? And at 16, I was, yeah, I was not, I was all over the place. And I thought to myself, is that a trick question? And I thought, well, I think what I'd say to myself is, you're doing all right. It's going to be okay. You're doing all right. So this is not with the sense of trying to fix things or repair things or a deficit model. It's more a playful exploration. So there's this idea of between stimulus and reaction, there's a pause. And if we can come in that pause with a sense of possibility, there are these different doorways. I want to introduce one more practice, one more exercise before we kind of really dig into this responding wisely. I was teaching a class a couple of years ago, a mindfulness class with my dear friend and colleague Alison Yangu. And we were talking about this theme of responding wisely. And this participant said something which was just like kind of bells went off. She said, what I found so interesting with this sense of responding wisely is that if I can create this space, what I find is really needed in that moment is a sense of a compass, a sense of direction, a sense of purpose. This space isn't just a vacuum. What's really helpful is to have a sense of what's sometimes called my true north. So I'd like to just lead a short kind of contemplation, if you like, on what that means for us. Of course, this is an evolving thing and it will change in different situations and over time. But let's just look at what it might mean for you in this moment right now. So just take a moment to think about, and it's fine for this to be an imaginary scenario. Think about a kind of event that's coming up or might be coming up in the next couple of years where a group of people that you really care about are going to come together in some form of celebration for you. It could be a birthday party, might particularly be a big birthday party like a 30th or a 21st or a 40th or whatever it is, 60th, 80th, whatever it might be. Or it might be some kind of transition point, a ceremony to mark a relationship or a marriage or a retirement party. So just bring this event to mind. And then at this event, with a real sense of love and a real sense of ease, somebody does that thing of just tapping their spoon against the glass and saying, oh, we're going to have a few words now. And just think about some people that you really care about and you really care about what they think about you. And those people stand up and they say a few words about you. What is it you'd like them to say? Or what do you think they would say, actually, about you, your character, your values, your behavior? Just take a moment just to scroll through each of those people. Might be a really good friend. It might be a former boss or somebody who worked with you or for you. It might be your partner. It might be one of your children or your grandchildren, or your mother or father or grandparent. And just scroll through and see what words they use, what phrases they use to describe something about you and the essence of you. And as you do that, just see if there's anything missing, anything that you would say feels, gosh, that actually is my true north. That's really important to me. And they've maybe not said that because that's not something they necessarily see. And of course, this is different for everybody. And when I've done this in workshops with groups of people, I just want to just read out some of the things that people will say. My faith, my family, my health, gardening, sense of belonging, my career, sense of adventure, helping others, doing something to secure the climate of our planet, the biodiversity of our planet, the arts, higher order values like freedom, integrity, fun. And of course, the list is endless. So why is this important? This sense of values, this sense of integrity, this sense of true north. What that person was saying to Alison and I in that mindfulness class is she was saying, in that space, just invoking those values that are important to me make it really clear, or much clearer, I should say, what feels to be a wise response. So let's take a moment to explore responding wisely. And we're going to use the, the breathing space, which is a sort of mini mindfulness practice that we have been developing over all of the milestones, all of the webinars today. And we're going to make it into a responsive breathing space, a breathing space that supports this sense of responding wisely. So just starting by settling and grounding. And what I mean by that is just a sense of the feet on the ground, the torso, the pelvis, like the trunk of a tree, the feet, the sitting bones, like the roots of a tree. This sense of the body upright, strong, like a tree, majestic, but also flexible, able to shift and move. And just check in. Just check in with the landscape right now of the mind and the body. Maybe just a word or a phrase that characterizes the state of mind just now. Scanning through the body, and a word or phrase that characterizes what's happening in the body just now. Pleasant, maybe some of the unpleasant, maybe parts of the body where there's not much going on. Whenever you're ready, just bring your awareness, anchor your awareness somewhere in the body, the breath, somewhere else that can feel like a steady anchor for your awareness in this moment. Simple invitation is just to ride the movements of the breath or the movements of wherever you're attending with a sort of simple connection with the sensations in this part of the body through this in-breath and this out-breath. This is kind of where the anchor connects with the ground. And the anchor for you that keeps you steady, keeps you connected and grounded. Even if there's a swaying and a movement. And I'm sorry to mix metaphors, but similar to the roots of the tree. So a sense of being present, a sense of being anchored, a sense of being rooted. What I'd like to ask you to do now is bring to mind something that's going on in your life just now that is challenging, it's difficult, that you feel quite reactive about, but don't make it anything too big. Something that feels manageable. Something that in this moment you can bring onto the workbench of your mind, the workbench of your body, and look at without being carried away or overwhelmed. And just sharpen it up in your mind's eye. Maybe just get some imagery of what's happening in this difficulty, this kind of reactivity. If there are different actors, just kind of really sharpening the image of what might be happening, what's being said, what's being done. Just let it play out in your mind's eye. All the while, that rootedness and anchoring is still there, right? And just feel any reverberations of bringing this to body and mind in terms of the effect on your body and effect on your mind. And remember this dimension of awareness, of friendliness, of kindness, of curiosity. Just see if you can dial this up in this moment. Just be really curious, kind, friendly, caring with this difficulty, with this reactivity on the workbench of your mind. Just let these questions come from, in a way, the body up, not from the head down, from the body up. What does this moment need? So you've created a bit of space, you've created a pause, and you're asking now, what does this moment need? What would support my well-being? In this moment of reactivity, what would support my well-being? What would support the well-being of others involved in this scenario? If there are others, what would support the well-being of others? And of the values that came up just now, do any give you a sense of direction, give you a sense of purpose? What would support my well-being in this moment? What would support the well-being of others? And what's important to me? What's my compass? What can guide me in this moment? Maybe now just let that go. Broaden your awareness out to a sense of the whole body, the whole of this moment, unfolding moment by moment. And just step back for a moment and just reflect on what emerged. What doorways came up? What sense of possibility came up? What values came into play? So this is the responding wisely breathing space, or responsive breathing space, it's sometimes called. And I led that in a way that lasted, I'm going to say, 5 or 6 minutes. But of course, with practice, that can be done in 3 seconds or 5 seconds, or if we're really agitative and reactive, maybe we need to take a bit more time with it. but it's a skill that we can start to introduce throughout the moments of our day as we need to. In moments of reactivity, the momentary sadness, but also the feeling of love, the feeling of joy, the news story that takes us off, that friend that's reconnecting with us. What will support my well-being in this moment? What will support their well-being? Which values come into play? So I want to just turn next to a sense of the windows of capacity that we have to do this work. And what I mean by windows of capacity is what we've just done here can sometimes feel really possible and feel really spacious, and we have a sense of, oh yeah, that's something that feels really available and accessible to me. I can do that. And that's a sense of our window of capacity being quite large. And sometimes that sense of a window of capacity can actually grow, and we can feel like, gosh, I could really expand this into some quite difficult parts of my life. But conversely, there are times that things are happening, or our own history, or the kind of confluence of the situation means that our window of tolerance is really quite narrow. That reactivity feels kind of compelling and inevitable, and there is no pause, and there is no sense of choice, and there is no sense of something that could be done differently. How do we build a window of capacity? Well, through mindfulness practice, through cultivating the attitudes of curiosity, of courage, of letting go of habit, of leaning into possibility, kindness, and the theme of the next webinar, equanimity, a sense of balance, but also practice and confidence. What we heard from Sophia was a woman who had a long-standing practice that she was bringing to bear. A friend of mine was telling me this week, and I was deeply moved by this. She was telling me about her father, who in the final phases of his life was talking a lot to a chaplain. And he said, look, I really want to be awake. I don't want morphine. I want to be awake through the next phase of the last phase of my life. And they talked a lot together about hope. And it wasn't a mindfulness practice. It was more of a sense of a dialogue between this friend's father and the chaplain. And that dialogue enabled him to actually stay awake right the way through that final phase of life. Now, that's his choice. But my point simply is that he found a way through the support of his family, through the dialogue with that chaplain, to build that window of capacity to do that work. The window of tolerance, of course, for many people is something that's become quite narrow through no fault of their own, a history of trauma, a history of adversity, a sense of experiences that have happened to them have made it really limiting for them to move into certain areas of difficulty. And so when reactivity comes up and there's an invitation to respond wisely, people are just feeling overwhelmed. They're feeling outside of their window of tolerance. And of course, the skillful response there is anything that, well, first recognizing that's happening, and then pulling back and thinking, what will bring me back to a place of safety? What will bring me back to a place that I can actually do something here that feels like it's looking after myself, bring me back into a place that feels safe and manageable, sense of balance, grounding, the breath, kindness, stepping back, support. These are all things that people mention that we know work. Okay. So just finally, how do we integrate this into our lives? Well, the first is this increasing recognition as we've gone through the milestones, the stepping stones, the themes of this Mindfulness for Life program. That every moment of our day is potentially a chance to pause and bring to bear what I've previously called the 3 keys of mindfulness, but I'm now going to say the 4 keys of mindfulness. Any moment, the moments I was mentioning earlier, we can bring awareness. We can bring the attitudes of friendliness, of care, of curiosity. We can bring a sense of true north, of intentions and values. And then the 4th key, we can bring action, the sense of doing something or not doing something that is part of responding wisely. We can become really familiar with those doorways of the body, of mindfulness practice, of thoughts, of wise action, of re-entry, just knowing where they are and knowing which one feels right in different moments. And that comes through practice. And the questions I gave earlier are questions we can be really playful with. And we can ask different questions that work for us. So I said, what supports my well-being? What supports the well-being of others? What potentially supports the well-being of the wider community and the planet that we all inhabit? But there are other questions we can ask. Oliver Burkeman says that all of his years of writing a column for The Guardian, if he was to distill it into one bit of advice, he said, the question, what would enlarge me in this moment, would be the question. I think he said that in his final column. It's a great question, but I would expand it and say, what would enlarge me in this moment? What would enlarge others? What would enlarge this situation? So if I'm a teacher or a head teacher, or I'm leading a team or a parent, what will enlarge that group of people for whom I'm responsible? How can I respond in this moment and be a good friend to myself? What does my most curious, my most courageous, my most compassionate voice have to say just now? What feels true? What feels real? What feels authentic? And of course, all of this is an ongoing exploration. So, drawing to a close, my invitation to you between now and our next webinar in a month's time is to be playful with these responsive breathing spaces, with this sense of pausing and creating possibility throughout our day, in whatever moments it feels like it will be helpful to us. With this kind of reflection of what does this moment need? And in this spirit of this is a lifelong practice. I'm going to give the final word to a Greek philosopher who started out his life he was born into slavery. And he was part of a set of Greek philosophers who've now become known as the Stoics, but he essentially speaks to everything I've just said with these short phrases. He invites us to caretake this moment. Immerse yourself in its particulars. Respond to this person, this challenge, this deed. Quit evasions. I'll say that again. Quit evasions. Stop giving yourself needless trouble. It's time to really live, to fully inhabit the situation you happen to be in now. Thank you very much for your kind attention.